Side 5. He came back even fuller of wonder. The naffy was outside the airfield barbed wire, but only just. He'd seen the windsock blowing yellow in the breeze, and the control tower in the distance, and the shapes of the shark-like Spitfires in the sandbag dispersals, with men crawling all over them and starting up their engines. And there'd been no trouble at the naffy, though people had stared as he went in. But the man behind the counter knew Artie. When he read the chitty, he just said, "Bloody Artie. War would stop if he didn't get his fags." But when Harry got back to the guns, there was no sign of Artie. And what was much worse, the long brick barrack was full of men. He could see them leaning out of the windows, smoking, and behind others hitting each other with towels. He nearly turned and ran on the spot. But Artie was his friend, and he needed his fags. It took him all his courage to walk through the door. When he got inside, the noise was deafening. One man was dancing on the end of his bed in only a shirt, and that was waving up around his neck. Harry flicked his eyes away and was knocked flat by two men having a wrestling match, swearing at each other with such a flood of languages he'd never heard before. Don leapt to his rescue, barking. Somebody yelled, "Mind the kid, you daft buggers!" Then there was a great silence in the hut, and everybody was staring at him. "Please," said Harry, "I've brought Uncle Artie's fags." There was a great roar of laughter. Somebody said, "Just bloody Artie. He's got his own civvy Batman now. I wish I had somebody to run errands for me. That bloody Artie, if he fell in the river, he'd come up with a fish in both hands." Then a door opened at the far end, and Artie came out with a thick-set man with 3 stripes on his arm. "Shake hands with the sergeant, Harry," said Artie. Harry held out his hand and tried hard to look the sergeant in the eye. The sergeant had close-cropped ginger hair, a ginger moustache, and terrible piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through Harry's soul. "And what do you want, lad?" said the sergeant in a very booming voice. "Please, sir, Artie's fags." "You don't call me sir, you call me Sarge." The whole barrack fell about laughing, as if that was a very funny joke. "There's only one man you call sir," said the sergeant, "and he doesn't look much bigger than you, or much older. And he's got a little pip on his shoulder, and a little stick in his hand that he keeps on dropping. But you needn't worry about him, because he never comes down here except when he has to, because he might get his lily white hands dirty if he did." The whole barrack fell about laughing again. "So you run errands, boy?" "Yes, sir, Sarge." "Will you run one for me?" "Yes, sir, Sarge." "Well, you can run down to Amble, Huxtable's shop, tell the lady behind the counter that I shall be a little late for tea, because my commanding officer has just given me a lot of silly little forms to fill in. But how many German planes we haven't shot down? How many of this idle lot have got a dose of the crabs?" Everybody fell about laughing a third time, banging plates on tables, cheering and booing. "And here's 6pence for going." A huge red hand pressed into Harry's. He was in. He went back to the pillbox late that night. It was getting dark and it felt silent and lonely after the barrack room. But he was full to bursting with beef stew and dumplings and huge chunks of chocolate sponge pudding drowned in thin watery custard, and so was Don. And his head was bursting with all the new friends he'd made and all the things he'd learned. He'd learned how to blanco a belt, and how to polish boot toe caps by spitting on them, and how to polish the buckles on a soldier's belt without getting brosso on the webbing. He'd even done some spelling for a man writing home to his wife, and he'd played football with a ball that sagged like a squashed melon, and been tossed up among the rafters of the barrack by a Scotsman, not a word of whose sayings he'd understood. Artie had seen him as far as the barbed wire. "Enjoyed yourself?" "Yeah." "They're not a bad lot. They've nearly all got kids at home your age. They get bored. You're a new face, bit of interest. You want to come and see us again?" "Yeah." "Come any time, out of working hours. It's just one fella you'll have to watch out for. Our snidey friend, Corporal Merman. Spiteful bugger. Nobody likes him." "Which one was he?" Harry couldn't think of anybody he hadn't liked, even the Scotsman. "It's all right. He's on leave at the moment. For a fortnight, thank God. That's why everybody was so happy." "What's the matter with him?" "Oh, he's very regimental. Wants another stripe. Carries little tales to the officers. Oh, I don't know. All sorts of things. Whey-faced, thin bugger with spectacles. You'll soon spot him when you see him." "Good night, Uncle Artie." "Good night, Harry. Mind how you go. Hope your mum's not worried." "She doesn't mind what I get up to. Well, she should. I would if you were mine. Ta-ra, Uncle Artie." Harry had stumbled away, suddenly hardly able to look where he was going for tears. He kept his head turned away so Artie couldn't see them. Now there was just the empty pillbox and old memories. How could he be so miserable after such a happy day? But he cleaned out the grate, broke up driftwood and got a fire going, and piled on some of his hard-worn sea coal. As the fire roared up and Don came to lie beside him and enjoy it, and the wind sighed outside, he suddenly felt better. Snug. This was nice too, the sound of the wind and the sea, the soft patches of fur behind the dog's ears. How could life be so good and yet so bad? You just thought things were great, and then life smashed them up. You'd just made up your mind things were bad, and then something good like this happened. It was just too hard to understand. After a while, he slept. He became a great favourite, and so did Don. They stuffed him so full of bread and jam, great hunks of cheese and soldiers' biscuits, that his belt began to get tight. They gave him a forage cap with a badge so he felt a real soldier. They gave him the smallest pair of old boots they could find, because the salt water of the beach was ruining his shoes. They showed him how to darn his socks when they got holes in. They gave him spare socks, and the thing he valued most, a large pack with straps that he could carry on his shoulders. During the day, while they thought he should be at school, he still combed the beach. He didn't worry about food now, but he collected a vast amount of wood and sea coal so he could have a roaring fire every night. He found 2 old pans to heat water in and a battered enamel basin. He found a fresh stream running down the cliffs to the south and filled a lot of bottles with drinking water. And he kept himself scrupulously clean, washing his shirt and vest and pants. Nobody wanted a dirty kid. The worst thing he had to do was lie. They asked about his mum and his dad and his sister, and in an eerie way his whole family came back to life. Only now they were in the cottage down the coast and doing new things. He spent the walk to the camp making up new things that they did. The best thing he did was the walks with Uncle Artie. Artie had been born in the country, though he'd lived in London since he was 15. He was still a country boy at heart. He liked to set snares for rabbits, which made a nice change from the army grub, cooked with potatoes over the barrack room stove at night. He gave Harry the odd rabbit for his mam. Harry cooked it over his own nightly fire. He learned to set snares as well. He knew in his heart that Artie and the barracks were not forever. Sometime he would be on his own again. He must be ready for it, though he came to dread it. It would happen someday. Nothing good ever lasted. But at least nobody came near the pillbox. Until one night, when he was lying by the fire on his blankets, giving the rabbit in the pan an occasional stir. When he felt safest, it happened. Voices in the windy dark. He heard the woman's voice first because it was shriller. The woman's voice was sharp and angry. Then the rumble of a man's voice. They were quarrelling. He tensed up, waiting for them to pass. But they didn't. They stood quarrelling outside the pillbox. "I'm not having any more of it," said the woman. "It's not fair to me and it's not fair to your wife. I thought it was over when you went away. I hated that, but I got used to it. Now you've come back. You want to start all over again." It was very much a posh voice, a lady's voice. The man rumbled something inaudible. "Look," said the woman. "I know where you've been. You've been over France on those offensive fighter sweeps. Every time I heard that our fighters had made an offensive sweep and that only 2 of our aircraft failed to return, I thought one of them was you. I wrote you off. I made up my mind you were dead because you didn't write. But you asked me not to write. You said it was over. Don't you understand how I felt?" Rumble. "All I had left were those poems you wrote me. What good are poems? Poems don't keep you warm. Look, let's get in here out of the wind. I know you don't want to do anything, but we might as well get out of the wind." And the next second, they were through the door, standing in the light of his fire, watching him. A tall man in RAF blue and a slim, beautiful girl with long, dark hair. Don gave a warning growl. Harry grabbed Don's collar, and still there was silence. Then the man said quite gently to Harry, "Who are you?" His voice was posh as well. "Harry Buggerly. I live here." He said it angrily, bitterly. All his safety was gone. The pair of them looked about the pillbox, at the fire, the candle burning in its bottle, the blankets, the attaché case and the large pack, the heap of sea coal and the ragged rusty shovel he used to put it on the fire with. His home. "You live here?" said the man. He sounded dumbfounded. "Where are your parents? Killed in the bombings? Where? North Shields? When was that? About a month ago?" And you're all alone? I got the dog." As if he understood, the dog growled softly under his breath. The man looked about, then he said, "Do you mind if we sit down?" They sat, the girl's beautiful silk-stockinged legs folded gracefully under her, the man's arm round her slim shoulders. "Don't you mind being on your own?" asked the girl. "If they catch me, they'll put you in a home," the girl finished the sentence. Then she said, "But you want to be free." Harry nodded. It summed up his feelings as much as anything could. "You poor little beggar," said the man kindly. But Harry flared up. "I'm not a beggar. I got me dog, I got me friends, I got me home." He glared around the pillbox angrily. "Now I suppose you're going to tell the police about me." "I wouldn't dream of it, old lad," said the man. "But what will you do when the winter comes?" "What does that matter?" said Harry. "It's summer now. I might be dead afore winter, so might you. I like it here now." "Out of the mouths of babes and sucklings," said the girl. And she added, "I think I like it here now too." She looked at the man with a new expression in her face. We might all be dead tomorrow. She took his hand. His face strangely lit up. "Look, old lad," said the man, "we couldn't borrow your place, for half an hour, could we? I take it as a great favour. You couldn't take your dog for a last walk along the beach. I always took my dog for a walk last thing when I was a boy." Harry looked at them holding hands. Suddenly he quite liked them. For some reason he felt sorry for them. He wanted to look after them. "OK," he said, "bargain. You don't split on me to the police and I'll take the dog for a walk along the beach." "But how do I know when half an hour's up?" "Borrow my watch," said the man. "It's got luminous hands." He slipped it off and gave it to Harry. "Don't let the rabbit burn," said Harry. "Put more water in from that bottle." And then he and the dog were out in the whirling dark, with sheets of sand blowing along the beach and stinging up into their faces. He walked nearly to Joseph's cabin, then back. That gave them more time than they'd asked for. When he got back, they were gone. But the fire was made up nicely, and the rabbit still cooking, and they'd written with the end of a burnt stick on the concrete floor, "Thank you, Harry Baggerly." Harry thought with a start that the man had forgotten his watch, his superb fighter pilot's watch. But they never came back. Chapter 10. It was evening again. They were sitting on the cliffs watching the sea, Harry and Artie. So close they were touching. That was Harry's doing. He liked to lean gently against Artie as if it was an accident. The sea was up, crashing on the beach below. The sea was blue as the sky, but when the waves reared up before they broke, they went dark blue, then green, then creamy white. There were birds flying along the troughs of the waves, only feet above the water, shining as white as stars in the light of the setting sun. Artie raised the binoculars. He said the binoculars really belonged to the officer, but the sergeant took care of them for the officer and had loaned them to Artie as a special favour. "Just gulls," said Artie in mild disgust. "Lesser blackbacks." He handed the binoculars to Harry, who had a look just the same. It made him feel important handling the binoculars, which had WD stamped on them. Artie knew all about birds, and foxes and stoats and weasels. Artie knew all about the land, and Harry knew all about the sea from Joseph. They told each other things. Fair exchange, no robbery. "We mustn't be late," said Artie. "I've got me kit to do, and we don't want your mum worrying." Harry wriggled uncomfortably. That was the one worrying thing about Artie. He was always going on about Mum and Dad and Dulcie, as if he wanted to meet them, get to know them, be accepted by them. Harry hated lying, making excuses why Artie couldn't meet them, but what could he do? "I shall come back here after the war," said Artie. "Bring Dot and Keith for a holiday. You'd like Keith, you'd get on well. He's a little monkey just like you. God knows what you'd get up to together. Do you think you'd go on living here after the war?" "Dunno," said Harry, stamping down hard in his mind on this lovely impossible dream. "We haven't won the war yet. Do you think we're going to win?" "Oh, I had my doubts in 1940, but now, with the Russians and the Americans, yeah, we'll win in the end. Muddle through like we always do, I expect." "Oh, I swear that's an eider duck with her ducklings out there." He grabbed back the binoculars. They watched the duck land through the breakers. Harry was terrified for the ducklings. They were so small and the waves were so big and rough. The last duckling was too slow, was pulled back to sea by the undertow 3 times, struggling frantically, while the duck heedlessly walked away with the rest up the beach. Harry's heart was in his mouth. He knew how helpless and desperate the duckling must feel. As he watched it struggle, he was the duckling. At last it escaped the tugging waves with a final terrible effort and scooted away after the rest of the family. When at last it rejoined them, Harry heard Artie give out his breath with an explosive sigh. Bad mothers are the ducks. They lose a lot of chicks doing that kind of thing. Nature's very cruel. Aye, said Harry. Bloody courtroom ermine comes back from leave tomorrow, said Artie. You'll have to watch it at the barracks. Try not to get across him, miserable sod. I don't know why God makes people like that, a misery to himself and others. Harry felt his stomach squeezed tight. It had been such a great fortnight. All the fun in the barrack room, the lads shouting for him. Where's that young Harry? Harry! Harry! Nip down the naffy for me, kid, will ya? 20 caps and full strength and a quarter of mint humbugs. Our Harry's going to be a soldier when he grows up in the artillery. Even the sergeant had rolled in one night, mildly drunk from the sergeant's mess at the airfield, and put Harry through his drill with comic gusto. Steady! Ace! Attention! Left turn! Left turn! Right turn! About! Turn! Wait for it! Wait for it! He belonged. Belonged to everybody. But there was no one like Artie. The walks alone with Artie. Hey! Said Artie with a squeak. Gannets! Again he grabbed the binoculars off Harry's lap and turned the focusing wheel rapidly. Yes, just out beyond that red marker buoy, down the coast. They're diving for fish. Artie had leapt to his feet, and Harry with him. Here, look! Harry twiddled the focus wheel, got a brief close-up of old Joseph's cabin with the chimney smoking, then swivelled out to sea. Just in time to see a huge white yellow-tipped gannet fold its wings and fall like a Stuka dive bomber. It hit the water like a dart, vanished with hardly a ripple. And then the sea boiled, and the gannet was struggling back into the air with gangling, water-laden, furiously beating wings. And another, and another. Caw, said Harry, and moved outwards for a better view. He heard Artie shout a warning, and at the same moment the grass and soil under his left foot gave way. He dropped the glasses, saw Artie's outstretched hand and grabbed for it, touched it but couldn't get a grip, and the next minute he was falling. Something hit him a terrible blow on the back of the neck. A pain shot up his left leg, then he was staring up at Artie's tiny head peering down far above on the cliff top. Don't move! Shouted Artie. I'm coming down! He just lay and watched Artie placing his hobnailed boots ever so carefully as he came down the cliff. Anything broken? Asked Artie, touching him anxiously all over. Got a headache? Harry raised both his arms and waggled them. Then he waggled his legs. Everything seemed to be all right. How many fingers am I holding up? Asked Artie. One, stupid, Harry giggled with relief. Do you think you can try and stand? Artie helped him to his feet. Fine, said Harry, then tried to take a step forward with his left leg. As he put the weight on the foot, he shouted, Ouch! What is it, your ankle? I'll be all right in a minute, gasped Harry, gritting his teeth and taking 3 more steps. It'll wear off. But it didn't. You've either sprained your ankle or broken it. I'd better get you home, and your mum can call a doctor. No, said Harry. What do you mean, no? I can carry you easy, you're no weight at all. I'll give you a piggyback. Just tell me where to go. Artie picked up the fallen binoculars, gave them a quick once-over and hung them round his neck. I'll go along the beach to that low place where there's a path. The dog will follow us along the cliff. He slung Harry on his back as easy as if he was a sack of potatoes. And so they went. The smell of Artie's hair in Harry's nostrils, the smell of tobacco and sweat. The best, most homely smell in the world. Except they were going to... There's our cottage, said Harry as the pillbox came in sight. I can walk from here, he added miserably. Put me down. Not on your Nelly, son, said Artie. I'll see you safe home with your mum. Tell her what's happened. His head was down with the effort of carrying Harry. He didn't see the cottage fall apart bit by bit as they got nearer, the slates off the roof, the peeling painted brickwork that Harry saw. We're here, said Harry bitterly. Artie put him down and looked up. Bloody pillbox? Is this your idea of a joke? Stop mucking about, Harry, lad. It's getting late. This is where I live. With your mum and dad? I haven't got any mum and dad." "Well, this beats all," said Artie, sitting back on his heels and scratching his head. "You're a good pluckton," he added, surveying the swept floor, the big pile of dry sea coal and wood, the heap of newspapers and the row of bottles of water. "What you sleep on? Me stuff's hidden in the roof. Can you get it down for me?" When Artie had got it, he said admiringly, "You make a bloody good spy. You've got everything to your convenience here." "I'll manage." Artie's eyes flared in alarm. "Aye, but you can't manage now. That ankle could be broken. You could be suffering from concussion. You should be seen to by a doctor, maybe in the hospital. If you split on me, it's the end of everything. They'll take Donna with you." Artie looked quite demented. "You don't know what you're asking of me, son. I might come back in the morning and find you dead." Harry said wildly, "I'd rather be dead than in a hospital." "Don't talk so wet. Look, Artie, give me one chance. If my ankle's no better by tomorrow morning, you can fetch the doctor." They looked at each other a long, long time. Then Artie said at last, "Till the morning, then. I'll do up your ankle with a tight wet bandage. Keep it wet from the bottles. Lucky I always carry 2 clean hankies. You got now to you that would do. By God, that ankle's swelling up like a football. I'll not sleep a wink tonight worrying about you." He was as good as his word. He was back by dawn with a flask of hot tea and plenty of bully beef sandwiches. He prodded the ankle doubtfully. "Yeah, it's gone down a bit, I think. Doesn't feel so hot. Try walking on it." Harry walked. He had to clench his teeth and sweat broke out on his forehead, but he walked. He would have walked if it had killed him. "Yeah, you've been lucky," said Artie. "I think it's just a sprain. I'll tie it up tight again, and you don't move a muscle, right? I'll be back to bring you your supper after work." For 4 nights and days, Harry obediently lay still. Mostly he slept. The rest of the time he crawled out into the sunshine and watched the beach and the sea. He felt oddly relaxed. It was like having a real dad looking after you. By the 4th night he could walk quite well again. He said, "I'll be up to see you at the camp tomorrow." "Yeah, the lads have been wondering where you've got to. They'll be pleased to see you back. Just as well you've mended. That bloody Corporal Merman's been wondering what I've been up to, dashing out of camp at all hours like that. Nosy sod." Chapter 11. The next evening, up at the camp, Harry had his first sight of Corporal Merman. Corporal Merman was sitting on his bed opposite Artie's. The sergeant slept in a little room at one end of the barracks called a bunk, and the 2 corporals slept at the other end to keep order, if anyone could be said to keep order. But Artie had been right. Corporal Merman did make a difference to the barrack room. Nobody was dancing on their bed in their shirt tails tonight. They were all just sitting, talking, almost muttering, most of them with their backs to Corporal Merman. He was a tall, thin man, with blonde, newly washed hair and a mouth as prim as a spinster's. His battle-dress trousers seemed to be made of a finer, thinner material than anybody else's, and they had creases like knives. There was an ironing board in the space by his bed, and newly ironed shirts hung on hangers everywhere. Even his white braces seemed cleaner and neater than the other men's. His face was long and very pale, shiny, almost as if it was a waxwork. He was polishing an already immaculate boot, but you could tell his large ears were busy listening. There were a few shouts of welcome for Harry, but they were a bit half-hearted. "Here's my favourite boy! Nip down the naffy for me, Harry!" "What's this boy doing here?" asked Corporal Merman. "This is a military establishment. Civilians aren't allowed." His voice seemed thin and weak, but it carried. There was a silence. Then there were low boos and jeers from all the way up the barrack room, an angry sound. "Stuff it, Merman," said Artie. "The kid does no harm. He goes to the naffy for us." "And a dog?" said Corporal Merman. "That's against King's regulations. Does the sergeant know about this, Corporal Blinking Sop?" "He does, as a matter of fact, Corporal Merman." The bunk door had opened silently, and the massive figure of the sergeant stood there, his braces hanging round his legs and a towel around his neck. "This dog and this kid are battery mascots. Are very popular, unlike some I could mention, Corporal Merman." Corporal Merman swallowed and smiled, a thin, cold smile, as if he'd swallowed an acid drop whole. The sergeant turned to Harry. "Nip down to the naffy for me, kid. Announce the players uncut." Harry took everybody's order and left. When he got back, the atmosphere in the hut didn't seem any better. He gave out the things and change, but all the time he felt Merman's cold eyes watching him. How could one man destroy the fun for so many? He didn't want to stay tonight. He wished Artie would ask him to go for a walk, but Artie was oddly quiet. In the end, the incoherent Scotsman suggested a game of football. Everybody played rougher than usual, and even Harry got one or two nasty kicks, though he was sure they weren't meant. Merman kept watching out of the open window by his bed with a superior sneer on his face. Finally, he yelled at Harry, "Boy! Boy, come here!" Harry tried to ignore him as long as possible, but he wouldn't be ignored. The game stopped. Another silence fell. With everybody watching, Harry walked across to the window. "I want you to go to the naffy for me, boy. I need a tube of toothpaste." "He only goes down the naffy once. Once every night," somebody shouted. "Yeah, leave the kid alone," shouted somebody else. "He doesn't really need toothpaste. Just trying to spoil a kid's game of football." "Well, will you go or won't you?" asked Merman. He looked at Harry with pale, pale blue eyes. They reminded him of the eyes of a wolf he'd once seen at the Edinburgh Zoo. He felt that if he went the errand for Merman, he'd somehow be in Merman's power, and that was the very last thing he wanted. He never wanted to go near Merman ever again. Merman made him want to shiver. "Got to get home to me, ma'am," said Harry, and walked away. "I'll remember that," said Merman. "Good night, kid," shouted the football players, and went back to kicking the deflated ball about miserably. The next day was Saturday. Harry went across to the barrack in the afternoon. As he approached the door, it seemed unusually quiet, but he walked in anyway. And then he wished he hadn't. There was nobody there, except Corporal Merman sitting on his bunk. "Where's everybody?" Harry faltered. "Your friend Corporal Blenkinsop had to march them down to the airfield for a shower. It was his turn." "What about you?" "Oh, I've had my shower. I have a shower every day if I can. What do they say? Cleanliness is next to godliness. Tell them I'll come back later." No, they've been gone over an hour. They'll be back any minute. Come and sit by me, boy." He patted the bed beside him. "I'm expecting them back any minute." Harry hesitated. One part of him was yelling at him not to go near Merman at any cost. But another part, it was creepy, wanted to make friends with Merman, get Merman on his side so he didn't have to be afraid of him any more. "I've got a Mars bar here," said Merman. "Like to share it with me? I know all you boys love Mars bars." That decided Harry. Against his better judgment, he could never resist a gesture of friendship. Maybe the awful Corporal Merman was human after all. He sat down. Corporal Merman got the Mars bar out of his bedside locker, put it on top, unwrapped it neatly without tearing the wrapping paper, just folding it back like a bedsheet. Then he got out his very sharp, shiny clasp knife and cut it into 9 thin slices, like a loaf of bread. He picked up the first piece, precisely between finger and thumb, and held it up to Harry's mouth, feeding him like a baby. Harry didn't want to open his mouth, but he had to. He didn't like the feel of Merman's fingertips on his lips. "You're a big, strong lad," said Merman. "You're very brown. I'll bet you have lots of girlfriends. No? Not any? Not ever? I'd have thought you'd have had a girlfriend by your age. Aren't girls nice to squeeze?" He put an arm round Harry's waist, found a fold of skin and nipped it very playfully. Harry wriggled violently, and Merman let go and fed him another piece of Mars bar. "I'll bet you have fun with that big dog of yours, though, running about the beach, wrestling in the sand." Harry had a very nasty idea that Merman had been spying on him when he hadn't realised Merman was there. "And of course you're a great friend of Corporal Blenkinsop's. You spend a lot of time together, don't you? Walks in the woods and along the cliffs." "We do nature study," shouted Harry, suddenly furious, for no reason he could quite work out. "We'll watch birds and foxes." "Yes, of course, nature study, of course. You must take me to see all these birds and foxes some evening." He fed Harry a third bit of Mars bar, holding it so high that he forced Harry's head back. "And you do other things with Corporal Blenkinsop." "Like what?" Harry wondered why he was getting so angry and flustered. "We'll watch gannets," he added lamely after a silence. "Course, gannets." Just then there was the crunch of boots on the road outside, boots approaching at a trot, not a walk. "Up, 2, 3, up, 2, 3, came Artie's urgent voice. Harry took a quick peep at Merman's face. The look on Merman's face was indescribable. All the men came barging into the barrack room, hitting each other with wet towels again. "Hello, Corporal Merman. Fancy finding you here." Artie's eyes took in one glance the two of them sitting on the bed, the sliced Mars bar. "Coming for a walk, Harry?" Harry came like a flash. As they left, Artie shouted back at Merman, "If they ever catch you at it, Merman, they won't just take away your 2 little stripes. They'll put you away in Colchester for 5 bloody years." They walked along the road. The silence was heavy like the dark grey sky. "I don't like him," said Harry timidly. "Quite right, son. Never go near him. When I realised what he might be up to, I couldn't get the lads back quick enough. They did the whole return journey at the double just for you. I hope you're honoured." "What is he up to?" "Never you mind, son. I wouldn't foul up your mind by telling you. Just stay away from him, right?" "Right." But nothing did seem to go right that afternoon. Harry could tell that Artie was very, very angry, and that seemed to frighten all the birds and animals away. Chapter 12. Harry wakened on Sunday morning feeling blackly miserable. It wasn't just that it was pouring with rain outside, though that didn't help. He just felt all wrong, jangled, jumbled up inside, and he couldn't tell what was wrong at all. Except that it was about Merman. He could think of nothing but Merman. He tried to think about Artie, or the incoherent Scotsman, or the man who danced on the end of his bed, but whatever he tried to think about, Merman kept sliding back into his mind. What did Merman want? He was like nobody Harry had ever met before. He was used to kind people like Artie. He was used to brutal people like the farmer with the shotgun. He'd even met 1 or 2 people who were a bit nutty like Joseph, and selfish people who didn't give 2 damns about you. But Merman wasn't any of those. Merman wanted something off him, and he just didn't know what. It made him feel very unsafe. So unsafe and miserable that he just got the fire going again, munched a miserable bit of breakfast, and lay on snug and warm inside his blankets. He cuddled Don a bit, and then Don got tired and mooched off for a walk. He heard footsteps coming along the path, leapt up, cursing himself for a careless idiot. The person passing would notice the smoke from the chimney and come and look in. After all his carefulness, his hiding place was discovered. Then he recognised the scrunch of hobnail boots. A soldier. It must be Artie come to see what was the matter with him. Artie would listen to him, explain the odd way he felt. Artie would make things better. He looked up with an attempt at a grin as the doorway darkened. But it wasn't Artie. It was Corporal Merman. "There you are," said Merman. "Snug in your little nest?" Harry couldn't think of anything to say to that. He just screwed up in a ball inside his blankets and stared at Merman, trying to read his face in the half-light. Merman was smiling. It wasn't a very nice smile. It was a sort of smirky, triumphant smile, pretending to be friendly. "Very comfy you made yourself, you and Corporal Blenkinsop." Merman came and sat down close to him as he had the other time. There was nothing that Harry could do about it. Merman was between him and the door. "I'll bet you have a lot of fun in here," said Merman, "with your nature studies." He sort of sniggered to himself. "We don't come in here much," said Harry. "We go for walks." "Well, I don't suppose Corporal Blenkinsop minds where you go, as long as you're kind to him." Harry thought that was a very strange thing to say. You weren't kind to adults. You liked them or obeyed them. You weren't kind to them. "We're mates," he said at last. "Of course you are," said Merman. "Just as you and I are going to be mates." He put a cold, damp hand on Harry's bare arm. It was horrible, like touching a dead fish. "I choose me own mates," said Harry, pulling his arm away. He blurted it out and then wished he hadn't. He didn't want to get Merman angry. He thought he might turn nasty. But he couldn't stand Merman hovering over him like that, touching him. "Choosy, are we?" said Merman. He didn't seem annoyed, more excited. "I wouldn't get too choosy if I was you, or you and your mate Corporal Blenkinsop might end up in a great deal of trouble with the police. Corporal Blenkinsop might end up going to prison." "What we've done?" squeaked Harry. His mind flew across all the things he'd done. Lying to the chip shop man, hitting the farmer, eating the army grub, not having a licence for Don. How could they send Artie to prison for things like that? "But that doesn't have to happen," said Corporal Merman. Not if you're as kind to me as you have been to Corporal Blenkinsop." He took hold of Harry's arm and squeezed it again, a painful nip. Harry went berserk. He pulled his arm away and tried to kick out at Merman, but the blankets hindered him, and Merman just edged out of the way, laughing. But it did knock the blankets wide, exposing Harry's legs and underpants. And Harry caught Merman's eyes drifting down to his underpants, and he pulled the blankets back round himself desperately. He'd suddenly got Merman's number. Merman was like the dirty boys at school. The ones who hung around the toilets and messed about with you when you went for a pee, poking you in the back while you were busy, and making you pee all over your shoes. Or making remarks about you, or trying to grab your balls, which hurt like hell. Only they never went very far in the toilets, because there might always be somebody else coming in who might run and tell tales to the teacher. He was alone with Merman. Well, nearly alone. Suddenly he was yelling for Don at the top of his voice. "That won't do you any good," said Merman. "You haven't got a licence for that dog, have you? If I tell the police, they'll come and take your dog away. I don't think he's really your dog anyway. I think he's a stray, or you stole him." Harry heard Don bark on the beach, getting nearer. Then silence. No sound of paws, no more barks, no Don. Hope died. "Your dog's not coming," said Merman. "He's got better things to do. Perhaps he's found a bitch on heat." Again that smirk. Again his hand reaching for Harry's arm. "Come on," Merman wheedled. "You've only got to be nice to me. It won't take long. I can bring you things, sweets, Mars bars, things for your dog." "I don't know what you mean," shouted Harry. Then the doorway darkened again. Don was standing there. Don was growling, a deep rumble that was half choked, because a hand was hooked tight around Don's collar. Artie's hand. Artie didn't look at Harry. He avoided Harry's look. He said to Merman, "Come outside, you filthy bastard. I'm going to give you a hiding you won't forget to your dying day." Harry could hardly recognise it was Artie. Artie looked hardly human. Merman tried to bluster. Merman's voice shook, but he tried to sound reasonable. "I'm not wanting anything you haven't done," he said. "You sneaking along to this kid morning and night. I saw you. I followed you here. You're crazy for the kid. You couldn't get enough of him." "Come out," said Artie in a dreadful voice. "Come out, or I'll let this dog loose on you, and then I'll drag you out and deal with what the dog's left." "There's no need to take it in that way. We've both seen plenty of it in the army." "Plenty of what?" Artie turned to Harry. "Have I ever touched you, Harry?" "Only to bandage me leg," said Harry. He turned to Merman. "I sprained my ankle. He was looking after me." Something seemed to flicker out and die in Merman's eyes, leaving him looking pale and ill. "All right, I was wrong," he said to Artie. "How was I to know? Be reasonable." Harry felt a tiny flicker of sympathy for him. Only a tiny flicker because he looked so lost. The next second, Artie had let go of the dog and grabbed Merman and was dragging him on his knees out of the pillbox. The dog was barking wildly and Artie was swearing like a man possessed. Harry was still trying to quieten Don when he heard the first blows. Harry didn't try to follow. He just sat listening to the sounds of the fighting and Artie swearing and remembering the lost look on Merman's face. Then he heard Merman screaming and sobbing. "Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!" Terror drove him out of the pillbox to see Merman on the ground and Artie with a boot raised. "Stop it, Artie! You'll kill him!" There was a trickle of blood down Artie's face from a cut lip, but Merman was writhing on the ground with his hands over his face, and his hands were red with blood. Harry flung himself at Artie, grabbed him round the leg, shouting, "Stop it! Stop it!" At last Artie relaxed and stood still, just panting and slobbering. Then he licked the cut on his mouth and drew a hand across his face and looked down at Harry and said, "Hello, kid. It's you." His face still looked very strange. "You could have killed him," said Harry. Artie sat down heavily on the grass. "Oh, maybe you're right. I wouldn't want to swing for that bugger. He's not worth it." He was still taking deep, shuddering breaths. "Merman didn't hurt me, honest. He was just pestering me. I know, lad. I followed him from the camp, the dirty bastard. I saw him going along the cliff. Nobody walks along the cliffs this weather. So I knew he was coming after you. I knew he'd spotted your hiding place. He must have seen me coming here when you were poorly with your leg." You mean all the time he was talking to me, you were listening? Aye. I had to make sure what he was up to, the dirty bastard. I had to wait for him to show his hand. That's why I hung on to your dog. When you called him, I had to hear what he was saying to you. Why? Because he was jealous. It was a new, creaky voice. They both turned and stared. Merman had hauled himself to his feet. His face was hideous, a mask of brown, drying blood. He was jealous, because he wants the same thing from you as me, only he was scared to ask for it. You filthy bastard! Artie leapt to his feet and made for Merman again, but Harry clung to Artie's legs and tripped Artie up so he fell full length, and Merman went staggering off along the cliff top like a drunken scarecrow. When he was at a safe distance, he turned and shouted, "I'll get you for this! Both of you!" Then he staggered away out of sight. They sat on a long time, staring at the sea. Artie dabbing at his cut mouth with a clean white handkerchief that slowly turned into a bouquet of bloodstains, getting fainter and fainter. Finally, Artie said, "I'd never have touched you, Harry. You know that. Not like he thought. It's just his twisted mind. He thinks everybody's like he is." "I know," said Harry miserably. "You're a married man with a son my age." "Well, that doesn't mean much," said Artie bitterly. "So's he. I feel sorry for his wife." Then he shrugged and said, "We're sitting here like a couple of loonies, getting ourselves soaked. Let's get out of the weather." They went back into the pillbox, and Harry made up the fire. They tried to get the blood spots out of Artie's battle-dress jacket, but they wouldn't come out. "Will you get into trouble?" asked Harry. "What? Corporal having a fight with a corporal? Happens all the time in this man's army. It'll cost me for a new battle-dress, that's all. Unless I can scrounge one from the quartermaster. But it's the end of a perfect friendship, Harry. You can't stay here. He can make trouble for you." "Why? What have I done?" "Sleeping rough, stealing a dog. You've got to move on, son. He'll probably be on the phone to the police the moment he gets himself cleaned up. Anonymous phone call, of course. No names, no pack drill. Look, you get packed up, get to that road over yonder. I'll walk back to camp and borrow a 30 hundredweight, set you on your road. Where were you going when we first met?" "Hawley Island, Lindisfarne." "Right. Lindisfarne it is, unless the tide's in." End of side 5.